To his left, William Dartmouth, MEP, again for the South West and Gibraltar, again elected in 2009, representing the UKIP party. And he will again be speaking very passionately, I've seen some of his YouTube videos, about the impact of leaving the European Union.
By the way, the questioner says, please don't say what we joined, but we didn't join the European Union. We joined a common market, and that's the whole point. So you can't just say, don't talk about that. That's 100% of the point. Now, I'm prepared to admit this. I'm old enough that I voted in the 1975 referendum, and I voted in favour of staying in. And what I voted in favour of was staying in a common market, which was basically about trade. Now, the detailed question, just to answer it in two lightning bits of detail, the unity of Europe, which the Americans were concerned about, it was, of course, the unity of Western Europe against Sabre's expansion. And that doesn't really apply now, at least not in the same way. And secondly, the economic growth, it has now become apparent that the economic growth enjoyed by the original 6 countries, particularly with France and Italy, was in large part derived from a movement of people from agriculture, from working in agriculture to working in industry. And what we now find, and this is relevant to now, is that the economic prospects for the European Union as it now is absolutely dire. Something happened in the first quarter of 2016, the end of March the 31st. And I'll tell you what it was. Production in the European Union outside the UK reached the same level that it had in 2008. So they've had a lost 8 years. So you can forget about the economic growth in 1975. It's the economic growth now which we should be concerned with, and it's absolutely flatlining. And certain economies, for instance, the Greek economy, is in fact contracting.
Further trade agreements. So, William, why is it going to be easy to make these trade deals?
Well, first of all, can I give the context of it? The context is this. A country or a business in a country does not need to have a trade agreement in order to be able to trade. So, for example, with the United States, we export roughly, last year we exported £57 billion. We don't have a trade agreement with the United States. We never have had a trade agreement with the United States. Now, as far as exports to the European Union is concerned, the top 3 exporters, China, Russia, and the United States, do not have trade agreements with the European Union. The 6 of the top 10 exporters do not have trade agreements with the European Union. 11 of the top 20 do not have trade agreements with the European Union. You don't need to have a trade agreement in order to be able to trade very successfully, and trade very, very profitably. Now, the reason that they're able to do that is because they trade under World Trade Organization rules, which is a structure under which world trade takes place. Now, one of the penalties we pay for being a member of the European Union is that our seat on the WTO is in abeyance. We only have observed status, and we're subsumed as one of 28. Now, that's the context. Now, the specific question is, why is it so straightforward to basically have a trade agreement? The reason is this. There are 2 reasons. First of all, as a question of fact, the European Union has got trade agreements with the Republic of Madagascar, with the Seychelles, with Belize, with Chile, with all sorts of countries all over the world. And so it would simply make no sense for them not to have a trade agreement with the UK, even though we don't actually need one. Further to that, we're actually running a massive trade deficit with the European Union. Now, in terms of mercantilism, which is the basic French idea of mercantilism, which is what China is doing now, in public policy, that may not be a very good thing. But it is a rather good thing if you want to make a trade agreement, because there's a commercial imperative. There's a commercial imperative for there to be a trade agreement. So I sum it up in one sentence of 8 words. A trade agreement with the European Union on Brexit is not necessary. It's not necessary at all. But in practical terms, it is nonetheless absolutely inevitable.
Well, the question really is we jump out of the club, the boys' club, we jump out of it. They're pissed off. Why on earth would they want to come trade with us again?
Well, hang on, because they make money doing so. They make money doing so. I mean, I don't want to question a questioner, but it seems to me that the implicit assumption in your suggestion is that we leave, the smelling salts had to be effective for President Juncker and all the rest of the usual suspects, and in consequence, Daimler and Volkswagen and Spanish producers of fruit and French wine residents won't trade with us. I mean, frankly, you're a great man, and thank you for all you've done, but I just cannot agree with the assumption on which that question appears to be based.
William, £6 to £7 billion a year, money well spent?
Well, it actually isn't, but I actually dispute that thing. First of all, we in UKIP have never put forward this particular figure, and I'll tell you why. Because it's not just the direct costs, which are the fees. And by the way, the fees are only going to go one place, and that's up. The present rebate is only there till 2020. And in addition, if the Conservative Party, the Conservative government, the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats get their way, and 5 very poor countries, Serbia, Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Macedonia and Turkey, become members of the European Union, we're going to have to pay vastly more in cohesion costs. But the real cost of the European Union is the indirect costs. Please bear in mind that only about 12.5% of the British economy is accounted for by exports to the European Union. 95% of British companies don't export to the European Union at all. Nevertheless, 100% of our economy is subject to EU regulation. And if you look at that, plus the cost of, for example, the common fishery policy, the corruption, waste and fraud in the EU institutions, the possible costs of bailing out the Eurozone, we've already made some payments to Greece, fines, DEFRA, which deals with farmers, was fined £680 million just the other day by the European institution. You're looking at total costs, indirect costs, of over 100 billion a year, and that is the cost that we ought to be looking at. And that is certainly 1,000% not worth it. In terms of lightning thing in terms of trade, services, Julie Girling was absolutely right to say there's all sorts of disruption in services. The single market is only complete 5% in terms of services. 95% it isn't actually complete at all. And then the average tariff, and then this phrase about trade at risk. It's very important that we drill down on this. And sorry, Chairman, is the contention of Mr. Carmichael and others that all the trade is going to stop? And if it isn't the contention, how much of the trade does he think is going to stop?
Okay. Mrs. Evans-Sawyer's ex-MI5, MI6 chief. One of the benefits we get is sharing security information. Now, clearly security in terms of business and everything else is a benefit. It's obviously helped us track down some very unsavoury characters. I think that's great for Europe, but they're saying that if we leave Europe, we won't get that benefit. We'll be outside the club once again. I'm intrigued with that because obviously there are various contradicting opinions. William Dartmouth, what do you say about our security?
Much better, but let's talk about our security in it. First of all, the UK has been a member of Interpol since 1923. Police forces and security services can cooperate perfectly well, perfectly capably, without being in a political union. Now, further to that, we're not very far from GCHQ here, and the fact of the matter is that the cooperation between the United States and the UK's security and intelligence services is much greater than now, than ever has been, ever will be, between the European Union and the UK security services. And the last time I looked, and perhaps you'll disagree with me, we aren't in a political union with the United States. And finally, I'd also make the point, if anybody wants a slightly more bit of refinement on this, is that at the time of the Paris bombings, the first one of Paris bombings, not the second, when all those people came from Brussels, Belgium, a place where I spent a significant amount of time, as Julie Girling does, ex-President Sarkozy of France complained about the lack of cooperation between the French and Belgian security services, even though they are in the political union. Also, and if we remain in, we've got vis-a-vis travel from Turkey coming up in the next 6 months.
We haven't got that yet. That's not going to
Hang on, we're going to have it in the next 6 months. The government are committed to full Turkish membership, and all that puts our security at profound risk. It's exactly the other way around from how the question was put.
I think
with respect.
I think the are we going to be a threat from terrorists walking through our borders?
So sorry. Again, I think it's odd the way that you pose the question. What the point is this: so long as we're in the European Union, all the citizens of 27 other member states, and if the government and the establishment parties get their way, by the way, that includes the Green Party, it'll be 32 other member states. They have the absolute right to live, work, settle, and settle in the United Kingdom and enter into the United Kingdom. The only thing they have to do is they have to show their passport. That's all. They still have the right to come in, and that's what the point is. And the other thing I will just say is, it is absolutely remarkable when one goes to these things that the people who are in favour of remaining, they always say, "Isn't it wonderful? We aren't in the euro. Isn't it wonderful? We aren't in the Schengen Agreement. Look at all these exclusions we've got." If there was really a strong argument for it, they would all say, we should be in the Schengen Agreement, we should be in the euro, etc., etc., etc. And that's a point which I'd like to perhaps leave people to dwell on. Well, we talk about Australian style points, it's also what the United States insists on as well. And with respect to Mr. Carmichael, nowhere in his very eloquent speech did he mention even once, did he explain to us why that in order to get skilled people, you have to open the door to hundreds of millions of unskilled people. And Mr. Chairman, you put your finger absolutely on it. And the fact, I would also make the point, I must quickly make the distinction between, as I'm with a very sophisticated group, the distinction between GDP and GDP per capita. The population of the United Kingdom at the moment is about 60 million. If you doubled it to 120 million, we would have a higher gross domestic product. There's no question about that. We would. But in terms of gross domestic product per head of population, it would go down. And for years and years and years and years, the wealth of a country was always measured by GDP per capita, not by gross GDP, until the BBC got going on it. And if you just measure it by gross GDP, you will then find that Bangladesh is a richer country than Switzerland, which of course doesn't make any sense at all, and is demonstrably and palpably untrue. And I'll just say, and I think it's very important, the gentleman over there with the beard, who made two great questions, by the way, two great points. He said that we've had open borders and immigration for years and years and years and years and years. Well, that's not quite true. The big build-up in immigration in this country happened at two times. 1997, when the Blair government dropped the primary purpose rule, and in the context of what we're talking about now, in 2004, when the A8 countries from Eastern Europe came in, and we were the only country that gave, rightly or wrongly, that gave a completely open door. The fact of the matter is, yes, we do want to have skilled immigrants, particularly if there's job places for them. But in order to get skilled people, you do not have to have an open door to hundreds of millions of unskilled people. And that's really what the point is. And so long as we remain in the European Union, we have to have an open door to hundreds of millions of people, whether or not they're unskilled, and whether or not we would choose to have them living in our country.
Okay. I'm going to say, William, has David Cameron got greater influence over the EU than the Commissioners?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I must go back to this thing about sovereignty. When you're there, you just realise how much sovereignty or ability to run ourselves we've actually given up. Now, I'll give you one lightning example of this. There are in this country 4 mobile phone networks, which I'm not going to read out. One of them, was going to be absorbed. So the number of networks would have gone down from 4 to 3. Now, the UK regulator thought, and I don't know whether that's right or not, that this would be uncompetitive and not in the interests of the British consumer. But the decision is not made by the UK regulator. It's made by the EU Commissioner in charge of competition. Now, as it happens, and you've probably read in the papers, the EU Commissioner did agree with the UK regulator. But the fact of the matter is that even deciding about what mobile phone networks we have, or how many we have, that's not decided by us, because we've given that right away. Now, I don't know if anybody's got any appetite to hear anything about steel. Maybe David will be the only person who will. But as you know, that China is dumping steel on the European markets, which has terrible consequences for steel producers. Not just in the UK, but all over. I've been constantly lobbied by the European steel makers. Now, the United States immediately put 300% anti-dumping tariffs on steel imports from China. Now, we, on the other hand, the chap with the shaving picture of the industry, was, I never remember his name. Sajid. I'm so sorry, I don't mean to insult him, I really don't. Sajid thought that we should do the same, but the British Trade Minister does not have the power to do that. The only person who has the power is the EU Commissioner. Now, I actually wrote to the EU Commissioner about 6 months ago requesting that this happen, if I can just put my minor plug in for myself, but that's not the point at all. Now, what the EU Commissioner did, the EU Commissioner took 5 months versus for the United States 2 months to put on a tariff of 40% versus the US's 300%. So the fact of the matter is, it is sovereignty. We don't have, not only is the question is that we don't democratically have the ability to rule ourselves, it's also that decisions, which are very, very important for this country, very, very important for people working, even for something like mobile phones, they aren't made by us, they're made by EU commissioners and not necessarily in the UK's national interest. That's the point.
Mr. Cameron reassures us that the UK will prosper in a reformed EU. What I wonder is, do the panellists know what these reforms may be, and when can we expect them to be enacted?
Well, Mr. Cameron, the Prime Minister, who's head of government, who as head of government I have great respect for, at the maximum moment of leverage, at the maximum moment of influence, when there's a referendum, which maybe he's going to win, maybe he's going to lose, he goes onto the European Union and says, please renegotiate, please will you renegotiate our terms of membership. Now in practice, he asked for very little and he came out with less. He didn't even get what he asked for in fiddling around with slightly more defined benefits, which didn't really amount to very much. He didn't even get that. And this is at the absolute maximum moment of leverage. So the fact of the matter is, you hear all this jargon phrase, a reformed European Union. We want to be a member of a reformed European Union. Let's be absolutely clear. A reformed European Union wasn't on offer. It isn't on offer now, and it's never going to happen. What is going to happen is more and more and more EU integration. The Eurozone countries are going to get closer and closer and closer together. And the gentleman there, one of the reasons for the massive level of unemployment in southern Europe is because of the Eurozone. The Greek and Italian economies simply cannot function in the same monetary zone as Germany. It just doesn't work. And the only people who are going to bail them out are going to be the Germans, and the price which they're going to exact is more and more EU integration. So I must also make the point, this is in 4 words, the fact of the matter is, when considering how to vote in this referendum, the fact of the matter is the status quo is not on offer. It's going to be more and more and more expensive and more and more or less of actually what people want.
Julie Gerling?
Yeah, first of all, cheaper air travel was driven by the Open Skies Agreement, of which the United States was the instigator. It didn't have anything to do with the European Union. Ryanair had this great thing of flying to lesser airports like Charleroi in Belgium and like Verona. All these places which pretend to be near places actually quite a long way away. They got subsidies from the councils, from the municipalities who control these airports. European Union's immediate reaction was to stop them doing that under state aid rules. Now, by the way, here in the southwest, as Julie Gurney will know much better than me, I have no doubt, we have Newquay Airport and the Scilly Isles Airport have been given a derogation from the European Union state aid rules. However, that does run out. So there's a long-term threat to those two airports, which would not be a good thing. And then finally, Mr. Neale Carmichael's great land of opportunity, 60% youth unemployment in Greece, 50% youth unemployment in Spain, 40% youth unemployment in Italy. Frankly, tell that to those people there. Tell that to those people there.
Thank you very much.